Hey listeners, it's time for another episode of Tech Policy Grind. I think you're really going to like this one, and it marks the first in a multi-part series we'll be doing on Bitcoin, blockchain, cryptocurrencies, and how they're barreling into the world of internet law and policy. Today, Joe and I had the opportunity to sit down and talk with Inayat Chaudhry. Inayat is a fellow with the Foundry and is currently pursuing her L.L.M at UC Berkeley School of Law, taking what has to be the coolest course load for, well, probably anyone that's listening to this show. Join us as we talk about her L.L.M experience, the value of internships at Wikimedia and the EFF, fundamentals of blockchain technology, and we all share our inner love for, or at least fascination with, Cryptokitties. As always, if you like the show, please stick around to the end. Maybe share the show with a friend. If you can't, leave a quick review on iTunes. You can follow the show on Twitter at TechPolicyGrind. We hope to see you there. For now, enjoy a nerdy dive into the blockchain rabbit hole with Joe Jerome, myself, Emery Rohn, and Inayat Chaudhry.
We're joined today by Inayat Chaudhry, who is currently a student at getting her LLM in Law and Technology at the Bolt School of Law. So Inayat, thanks for joining today.
Thank you for having me. I'm super excited to be here.
So we tend to ask people to start on every episode of Tech Policy Grind what they're grinding for in tech policy, what they're interested in. So what's up?
So I think for me, what excites me about being in the tech law and policy space is just, I think the fact that there are so many emerging technologies that are coming up right now. And I'm located in San Francisco, so especially in the Bay Area. And there's not a lot of policy out there that deals with these technologies or even laws for that matter. So I think being able to help create some of this policy, just be it in the form of academia at school or at internships, and actually helping move along the process of creating laws for these new technologies is what really gets me interested or excited.
So I guess my immediate follow-up question is, a lot of times I feel like when you're talking to people, innovators or people in the tech space, they're pretty anti-regulation. Regulation is going to stomp innovation and destroy it all. Is there an emerging tech space that you think needs to be regulated? Are you one of these people who are joining with Elon Musk, who suggests we need to put down a boom hammer on artificial intelligence?
Oh, it's so interesting that you mentioned that. Yesterday, actually, so we had class. I'm doing this class called Law Tech and Scholarship Seminar at Bolt. And we talked about artificial intelligence for 2 hours. And we basically discussed regulatory policy in some detail, I guess. So I guess the way I feel about it is there's 3 stages of AI, right? I guess I'm going to explain the 3 stages. There's ANI, which is artificial narrow intelligence, and then there's AGI, which is artificial general intelligence, and then there's ASI, which is artificial superintelligence. So in each of these 3 stages, AI behaves in a pretty different way. So, for example, in the ANI stage, an AI might be only doing a specific task that it's being told to do, versus in the AGI stage, where AI is basically acting like a human being and making decisions like a human can. And in the artificial superintelligence stage, I think the AI is supposed to be a little smarter than humans, or a lot smarter. These are just the discussions that are happening in the AI space. And I feel like a lot of people don't agree with these delineations as such. But the reason I bring that up is because you asked about regulation, and I feel like if we're going to have AI out in the world and there's different types, there's different ways to regulate them, right? We can't regulate something that's doing a specific task in the same way that we can regulate something that's working akin to a human. So I mentioned that because let's say you tell artificial intelligence, there's 2 types right now, ANI and AGI, to basically eliminate violence. So because ANI is just programmed in this specific way of just eliminating violence and doesn't have any more input, or I don't know, it's not programmed in a way where it can know more than what it's being told to do. I think what it might end up doing is, oh, hey, they told me to eliminate violence. So one way to do it would be to eliminate anything that's causing violence, which would be humans, right? So that's bad, obviously. And
yeah,
it's super horrific to even think about, but yeah. And then AGI, which actually depends on neural networks, or at least we're getting to that stage, would basically think about other ways to do it or better ways to do it without actually like hurting humans. So I think if we are going to think about regulation in the artificial intelligence space, I think it's super important just because we don't want to get to a stage where like artificial intelligence is smarter than us and we don't know what the hell we're doing in terms of like policy. I think I do agree with Elon Musk because I think it's better to be proactive in this stage rather than reactive.
Stephen Hawking agrees too. I don't know. They're just smart people. Can we talk a little?
No, go ahead, Emery.
I was going to say, before we dive into AI, I really wanted to jump back onto your L.L.M. And talk about the process of getting an L.L.M. and the choices of why you went for your L.L.M. After already having your law degree, and sort of what that journey was like.
So I think what happened for me was I graduated from law school and moved to the Bay Area. And I worked at the Wikimedia Foundation with Anisha. And after that, I worked at the Electronic Frontier Foundation. So those were my 2 fellowships over the course of a year. And I realized when I was working at these organizations that, like I said, there are so many emerging technologies. And a lot of the times I would be researching issues and realize that there's not a lot of policy that goes behind, or there isn't policy that is in place for a lot of emerging technology. So I'd taken all the basic classes in law school which dealt with intellectual property. Like I took copyrights, patents, but I never actually got to take classes that dealt with technology as such. So for example, at Bolt, I took classes titled blockchain. Like I'm taking a blockchain class right now with engineering and MBA students. I took classes called FinTech and social media last semester. Snap, Google, and Fox, like corporate governance at controlled companies. So those are classes that are very different from what you get as a basic like JD student. So I decided to apply because I realized that I'm super interested in this area and that I wanted to pursue it further. And applied to Bolt, obviously, because technology, Silicon Valley, like Bay Area, what better place to be, right? So luckily I got in, and it's been fascinating. Like I wouldn't have it any other way. I would do it again if I had to, if I got the chance, basically, because I feel like
how many years?
It's just 1 year.
Just 1
year? Yeah. So I graduated in May.
Oh, exciting! Congratulations, that's coming up. Well, you said that you interned at both Wikimedia and EFF. I think those are 2 individually, each are dream internships for law students, especially, and they're super competitive. We have talked on the show before repeatedly about the importance of internships for early career professionals, and how important it is to get out there and hustle. But do you want to talk about the experience of, I guess, applying to EFF and Wikimedia, and how rewarding of an experience it was, or would you recommend it to other people?
Oh, yeah, definitely recommend it to everyone, basically, in law school. So the experience for me was, so when I was in my last semester of law school, I applied to Wikimedia to be a fellow. And the way it worked for me was I had 2 rounds of interviews, and one was with the legal director at the time, and the other one was with just another legal counsel. So they asked me, just like, how if you work for a tech company, you have technical questions. So they asked me basically IP questions, and just to test my knowledge of like how well I know IP or tech law. And they also asked me about like my past experience and what I anticipate myself doing in the future, and whether I was like really interested in it. So it was actually a pretty rewarding experience because they gave me this like hypothetical, which made me think about like IP law in a way that I hadn't thought about in law school, just taking a class at law school. So it was super cool. The interview process was really fascinating. And the second round was very similar as well. So after 2 rounds, you finally find out like whether you get it or not in a couple of weeks after that. So that was the process with Wikimedia. And with EFF, I applied when I'd already graduated from law school, and it was very similar. It was just instead of 2 interviews, it was one interview, but it was with a panel. So it was 2 people, and they asked me basically very similar questions, my background, and talked to me about IP issues, about tech issues, and policy. So, and yeah, I would highly recommend everyone in law school who's even thinking about working in the IP or the tech space or the policy space to basically apply to these 2 internships. Super rewarding.
How long were you at each of those internships? Was it just a semester each, and did you do it back to back in your 2L year or your 3L year? Or, I'm always interested in the mechanics of that because it's so tough to fit in as much as you need to fit in law school.
So I actually worked at Wikimedia for 4 months, and I worked right after I graduated there. So I graduated from law school and moved to the Bay Area, worked at Wikimedia, and then right after that, I worked at EFF. So it ended up being a year for like if you combined both of them, and then I went back to school. I went back to Bolt. So that was my process. I did other things my 2L and 3L years. So my 2L summer, I was at the San Francisco City Attorney's Office doing just workers' compensation litigation and taking depositions. Or one super interesting thing about like if you work for the City Attorney's Office in San Francisco is they let you take depositions. At least the workers' compensation team does, which is super, super like fascinating as a 2L like summer associate, I guess, to have taken a deposition while you're still in law school, because a lot of people don't even get to do it like their first year out of law school. So it's super rewarding.
So we talked a little bit about your L.L.M earlier and the exciting classes that you're taking. Honestly, today, though, we brought you on to talk about blockchain for, I think, part 2 or maybe part 1 of our 2-part blockchain cryptocurrencies episodes of Tech Policy Grind. And so you mentioned that you're taking classes specifically on blockchain in school. I think that's That's really cool. What is the academic buzz around blockchain right now? What are the people in universities saying about the potential?
So I think everyone's super excited about it. No one really quite understands it because there's so much to learn about. Like blockchain and Bitcoin, like they're not the same thing. And it's, like being in law school, you're pretty used to doing like law stuff and not technology stuff like blockchain. So anyway, my point is everyone is super interested, be it at the undergrad level or at the graduate level, or like even schools that have nothing to do with like tech or law or policy are super interested in it. So the way Bolt works, at least, is when students go up to professors. So we have this center called the Berkeley Center for Law and Technology, BCLT, and we have just amazing faculty just directing it and just being part of it. So I think when students want something, they go and tell faculty like, hey, this is an emerging area in the space and we really want to learn about it. So why don't you like create a class around it? So so this blockchain class was actually the brainchild of 3 professors. One was at the business school, one is at the computer science school, and one is obviously at the law school.
Very cool.
So I think,
what are their names?
So Gregory LeBlanc is at the business school, Don Song at the computer science school, and Adam Sterling at the law school.
Was this your first exposure to blockchain in class, or were you interested in this beforehand?
I actually got interested my 1L year. So my 1L year elective was cyber law, which was back in 2014.
Right.
So it was cyber law, and we talked about the Silk Road and blockchain and Bitcoin. And in the summer of 2015, when I was at the city attorney's office in San Francisco, I thought about buying Bitcoin because at that point it had dropped all the way down to $200. But I didn't end up buying it. So I don't own any Bitcoin or any cryptocurrency. Yeah, unfortunately.
I find it so much easier to be like interested in the mechanics and the science and the technology if you're not constantly freaking out about how much money you're losing.
Exactly.
But then I'm just saying that as a broke guy here. So
right. I mean, I feel like speculating on blockchain definitely would help you, live and eat in San Francisco, which is not exactly the cheapest.
Oh, yeah.
It's about the only thing that can, right?
Yeah. I just decided not to buy it because I was still in law school, and at that point we didn't have like an easy exchange like Coinbase. So I would basically be like holding it on my laptop, which I didn't want to do because I was still in law school taking notes, and if I left it at the law school, it would be, not so good.
Well, so can I ask a dumb follow-up question there? So you're hinting at the fact that the Bitcoin would have been on your actual personal computer, and then you hinted at Coinbase. For people out there who, like me, don't understand this landscape, what exactly is Coinbase?
So Coinbase is this exchange that you can use, and the way it works is You hook up your bank account or your credit card or your debit card, and you can buy cryptocurrency. So you can buy Ethereum, Bitcoin, and Litecoin on it. And you can just basically use either your credit card or your bank account to directly purchase it. And the tricky part is once you do buy cryptocurrency, you have to keep it secure. So you have to have a digital wallet to put it in. And that's essentially just how like Coinbase works. But if you have any specific questions about like anything else,
well,
I'd be happy to.
She hit on an excellent point that is that when the news hits inevitably that this such and such cryptocurrency exchange was hacked and everyone lost hundreds of thousands of dollars in Bitcoin and they were fools for investing in Bitcoin, that there's a saying in the cryptocurrency world that if you don't own the keys, you don't own the coins, which is the tendency to treat these exchanges as the trusted middleman that they are and just sort of keeping your funds at these exchanges and never sort of owning them. So Inayat was bringing up the great point that, if you are interested in investing in this stuff, make sure that you have thought very carefully about how you are securing it and on which devices you're holding your coins. Because again, you're holding the private public key pair.
Right. So it's because like this whole thing is based on cryptography, and which is what Emery's talking about, the public versus private key. So you hear of these stories in the news where these people mined Bitcoin back in like 2011 or something, and they just basically got rid of the hard drive that they stored it on, and in December at least it was worth millions of dollars. So if you had like 1,000 Bitcoin lying around in a hard drive that no longer exists or you don't know where it is, like you basically lost a lot of money, right? Because cryptocurrency was worth a lot back in December 2017.
It's not to say that Bitcoin was hacked, which is, of course, what the narrative is always like, oh, cryptocurrencies are vulnerable and you could lose thousands of dollars. No, we brought this up in the other show, but the whole idea is to shift the responsibility onto the individual away from middlemen. So individuals are really good at losing their own data, it turns out. And when that happens, there's no regulatory body to enforce it or to protect them.
Exactly.
Joe, you had a really good question that we were talking about before the show started about the energy consumption needed to mine cryptocurrencies. Inayat, do you want to talk about that? Do you have any thoughts on the energy issue?
Yeah, I think so. So I think the reason Bitcoin uses so much energy is just rooted in the way that it operates, the Bitcoin network operates. So as we already talked about, a digital currency like Bitcoin is not controlled by a central bank or a commercial clearinghouse, but it's by a network of users who expend large amounts of computing power and thus energy, building a blockchain of Bitcoin payment transactions. So in order to actually do this, the Bitcoin network relies on miners who mine this Bitcoin. And they have to basically perform a large number of computer calculations to track and verify transactions. So it's akin to solving complex puzzles to obtain rewards. So as Bitcoin becomes more popular and more valuable, obviously there's more incentive for more miners to get on the system and to keep mining more Bitcoin. So that obviously means more energy usage. But I think so far, obviously, there's been websites that have said that the amount of energy being used is akin to like the amount of energy that countries like Denmark or Ireland use. But I think if we think about it, it's still a pretty new technology, and moving forward, there are a lot of things that can change. So, for example, Ethereum is thinking of changing its proof of work algorithm to a more energy efficient proof of stake algorithm called Casper, and that change would actually minimize energy consumption. And so, under proof of work, the algorithm rewards miners who solve these mathematical problems. With the proof of stake, the creator of a new block is basically chosen in a deterministic way. So, and it's dependent on wealth, and it's defined as a stake. And there's no block reward in Ethereum, unlike Bitcoin, where there is a block reward. So
this is where I get so confused, right? So we have all of these dueling, competing cryptocurrencies. I guess the market will eventually choose a winner here. But it just seems like, I guess so I guess I want to start mining for cryptocurrencies. Do you have, where do I start? Should I be mining for Bitcoin?
Well, you need a time machine. and a graphics card from 2011.
Basically, yeah, I mean, mining would be one way to go about it, but I think at this point, I mean, Bitcoin is already using, if you want to be energy efficient, Bitcoin's already using so much energy and there's already so many miners on the system. I think one way for you to start would be to like do Ethereum instead, because one, it's not as popular as Bitcoin just because Bitcoin was the first in the market, and everyone thinks about cryptocurrencies as being Bitcoin, especially people who haven't heard of it before. But Ethereum, or Litecoin seems to be a version of Bitcoin that's better than Bitcoin, or at least that's what they say. So with Ethereum, it's not just a cryptocurrency. It incorporates this concept called smart contracts. So, and with their goal of being energy efficient, I think that would be a good way to start.
So maybe you guys can both talk about this question. So any change to the system, how is that determined, right? So I've heard of like these cryptocurrencies get forked because people can't agree on how big the block is going to be or any of this stuff. And so now we've got two competing versions, and I guess that's where I sort of get super confused, where I'm interested in this. I don't know where to start. What happens if I start putting all my money and energy and computing resources into a cryptocurrency?
Imagine if an open source community suddenly was a government. That's how I like to think about it, because it is essentially all of the policing, all the decisions are made in the same model as open source software development, where we have developers that have been working on this for a long time, and not all the developers agree, but this batch of developers works on this this part of Bitcoin, and then other developers disagree fundamentally with it, so they say, oh, well, we're going to make a different kind of Bitcoin that, uses almost all the same technology, but is fundamentally different in a different way. And then those people start just trying to convince everyone to use their version of Bitcoin. And if enough people start using it, then the other version of Bitcoin is sort of depreciated. Is that about right, Inayat? Because I'm not sure if I...
Yeah, I feel like you encapsulated it pretty well.
So, Emery, you mentioned, I guess this is a bad segue, but I'll use it anyway, comparing basically a group of open source people as the government. Well, so what role should the government be playing here? Obviously, when you're dealing with cryptocurrencies, you're dealing with money. Whenever you're dealing with money, governments are going to get engaged.
Yeah, sure. So on February 6th, actually, the Commodity Futures Trading Commission and the U.S. Security and Exchange Commission met together to discuss the roles, like what roles they can play in blockchain, virtual currencies, and ICOs. So ICOs being initial coin offerings.
Thank you. We use too many acronyms on this show.
I know. Yeah.
We should talk a little bit about ICOs at some point.
At some point, yeah. So basically what they talked about was, so Christopher Giancarlo, who's chairman and witness of the CFTC, he basically expressed optimism in his testimony when he was talking about blockchain and the decentralized ledger technology. Which is just another word for blockchain, essentially. So he basically said that, like moving forward, digital currencies will obviously require more attentive regulatory oversight in regards to like fraud and manipulation, because right now a lot of the conversation that is happening about regulation in this space is with respect to like fraud and manipulation, because like Emery said, you hear all of these stories where like Bitcoin was basically stolen from your digital wallet. And but anyway, in his conclusion,
but isn't that usually it's the user's fault, right?
I mean, it's as much as it is anyone's fault for getting malware. There's tons, it can be, it's not best practices to keep your cryptocurrency on a laptop that you frequently use for general purposes, because you might, be just as likely to get a malware that could steal that cryptocurrency. I'm not going to say that's your fault. That's just sort of nature of the beast of being on the internet in 2018.
Just the way it works, yeah. So I think what he basically said was essentially it boils down to, like, we are noticing that there's innovation happening in this space and we want to continue allowing this innovation, but at the same time, we can't ignore like all the fraud and manipulation that's going on. So we want to work together with the SEC to develop good practices. And at the same time, Clayton, the chairman of the SEC, was a little bit less excited about virtual currencies. And he basically said that from a financial regulatory perspective, these developments may enable us to better monitor transactions, holdings, and obligations. And obviously that will facilitate their regulatory mission, including like investor protection, because that's what the SEC is obviously about. So if I were to boil down what Clayton thinks in simple terms, it would be that he said that there seems to be a gradient that starts at ICOs, and then there's virtual currencies, and then there's blockchain. So blockchain is the one that needs the least amount of regulation. And in fact, both the SEC and the CTFC encouraged anyone willing to expand on this blockchain technology. ICOs, on the other hand, required the most regulation just because, just the nature of them. And virtual currencies are somewhere in the middle, who they need protection against fraud and market manipulation, but perhaps not as much as ICOs themselves.
Well, let's talk about ICOs. It's a good time to unpack ICOs and why, by their nature, they need to be regulated a little more.
Sure. So let me just explain what it is. And so an ICO, like I said, is an initial coin offering. It works very much like an initial public offering or IPOs. But instead of offering shares in a company, the firm is actually interested in offering digital assets called tokens. So a token sale is basically like a crowdfunding campaign, except it uses the technology behind Bitcoin to verify transactions. So let's take Bitcoin, for example. So the token is literally going to be called Bitcoin, and for Ethereum it's going to be Ether. So I think one of the first ICOs to really hit the headlines was back in May 2016 with the Decentralized Autonomous Organization, or the DAO, which was basically just a decentralized venture fund built on Ethereum. And in that venture fund, investors could use the DAO's tokens to basically cast votes on how to disperse funds, and any profits were supposed to come back to the stakeholders. So,
and it imploded.
Unfortunately, a hacker exploited a vulnerability in Ethereum's design and stole basically tens of millions of dollars in digital currency. But if we take another example, like cloud storage, because everyone loves cloud storage.
Everyone does love cloud storage.
Yeah. So several companies are actually building blockchains to facilitate peer-to-peer buying and selling of storage space, that could challenge companies like Dropbox and Amazon. So the tokens in this case are the method of payment for storage. So what happens is, a blockchain verifies the transactions between buyers and sellers and serves as a record for their legitimacy. So how exactly this works depends on the project itself. So for example, in Filecoin, which basically broke records recently because it raised more than $250 million via an ICO, miners would earn tokens by providing storage or retrieving stored data for users. So I think some people think that ICOs can lead to new exotic ways of building a company, and others are less enthused about it. So it just depends where you fall on the spectrum.
Dumb question. Why are these even necessary? Is this to raise revenue or to get?
I think so in the cloud storage space, it's basically helping these people who don't have storage by giving them storage, right? So I think there may be some charitable reasons that it exists, but I think raising revenue, obviously, because that's just what ICOs do, would be a big one. I think one of the reasons people actually like ICOs is because, for the Filecoin example that I was providing earlier, if a company like that gets very popular all of a sudden, it would basically enrich everyone who holds or mines the token, rather than a set group of the company's executives and employees. That's the decentralized principle behind it. So I just wanted to point that out.
Do we want to talk about Cryptokitties? I feel like it's a good transition.
Oh, Cryptokitties. I love Cryptokitties.
Oh my God. Do you actually know what Cryptokitties are? Okay.
Yes. So have either of you guys, so it's a game. Have either of you guys played it or know what it, know at length what it's about?
All I know is that my cryptocurrency friend is just like, oh my God, there are Cryptokitties. This is innovation run amok.
It's a really exciting, interesting application of cryptocurrencies, demonstrating that one of the values of blockchain is to create something that is uncopyable on the internet. And the idea of being able to create unique digital assets is something that has never been able to be done before, and cryptocurrencies is leveraging it. I'm not treating it as an asset or something I'm investing in or collecting, but it's really exciting from that area.
Do either of you have a CryptoKitty?
I don't, but I was super intrigued when it first came out. So I think they released it right after Thanksgiving in November. So the way they did it was, it's a game which is centered around breedable, collectible creatures called Cryptokitties, which are actual kittens on the internet.
Actual illustrations of kittens on the internet.
Yeah, basically. Sorry. Thank you for correcting me about that. So they can be replicated, taken away, or destroyed. So basically think about them like breedable Beanie Babies for our millennial generation.
Oh, yeah. So, I mean, I feel like all my friends who are into Pokemon are itching to get a hold of these. And plus there's cat fans all over the place.
Oh, yeah. Who doesn't love kitties? So basically they call themselves crypto collectibles instead of cryptocurrency, just because you can collect them, literally. So they don't have a gender. They can play the role of the male or the female. And the basic premise of the game is there's a marketplace, and you can either sell your kitten or you can breed it. And the reason the breeding part is important is because the whole way that you get more kittens is you breed them, and there are these unlimited number of possible genetic variations that these kittens can go through, just because. So every 15 minutes, the creators of CryptoKitties actually releases a kitten onto the system. And you can either start with one kitten, but it's more advisable to start with 2 kittens, I guess, because then you can breed them, right, and create more kittens. So the cool part about it is literally cool. So every kitty after it breeds needs a cooldown time, and it ranges, right? So it ranges from 1 minute, which is considered to be super fast, to catatonic, which is it'll take 1 week before it can breed again. So anyway, that's CryptoKitties in a nutshell. The thing that surprised me most, because I do play Pokemon Go, I still play Pokemon Go, is that there's a CryptoKitty named Genesis, which has a super fast cooldown time. It's 1 minute, and it is priced at $114,481.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Yeah. Wow. I don't know I don't have a good follow-up answer to that. My mouth is just sort of hanging.
I guess, there's plenty of dumb things like this in our world. What's the end goal? You just want your perfect family of CryptoKitties? It's just to keep,
the value is going to collapse. Eventually, it's a fad, right? Because there's no underlying utility being given here. It's just an example of a decentralized application.
Sure.
And again, I think that it's a really cool use case of creating irreplaceable digital assets. But yeah, I don't think the end goal is anything other than to just, let's see how much money you can spend on our cool kitties until this all goes down the hole.
No, I was basically going to. I'm basically out of questions, so I was just going to ask. So you're interested in this through a class, which is great. I mean, I think one of the issues that I think tech policy faces, particularly when it comes to law schools, is a lot of the stuff just isn't being taught yet. But I'm always just curious. All right, what would you recommend I read or get up to speed on to learn more about this? The fact that the SEC was, pontificating that's actually news to me. Is there any primary source of news that you're following on cryptocurrencies?
So for me, I am just keeping an eye out for any public statements being released by the SEC. Okay. So I didn't talk about the Howey test or securities law because I feel like I should have talked about it. But anyway, the Howey test is a test which determines what constitutes a security, the definition of a security. So it's basically a 4-factor test, right? So the first factor is there an investment of money? The second factor is there an expectation of profits from the investment? The third factor is the investment of money. Is it in a common enterprise? And courts have defined common enterprise in different ways and have used a lot of different interpretations. And then basically the last fourth factor is any profit that's coming from it because of the efforts of a promoter or a third party. So I think Section 5 of the 1933 Securities Act basically says that if you are issuing a security, it should be registered or be exempt from registration. So if it's like not doing that, it violates the Securities Act. So I think there's a lot of cryptocurrencies out there that can fall under the definition of what constitutes a security, and there are a lot that don't. So I think you have to be really careful in figuring out whether it's a security that you're dealing with or it's not. And because we talked about ICOs, and if you're going to offer it like an ICO, then you either have to register it or be exempt from registration. I think the SEC is going to come out with, like I said, I mentioned the hearing on February 16th that happened, or February 6th, I'm sorry, that happened between the CFTC and the SEC. I think they're going to come up with the rules pretty soon, and they're already like starting to think about it in a really serious manner. So as of right now, like cryptocurrency hasn't been, basically in most jurisdictions, been declared as illegal. Every like jurisdiction is, and I'm talking about like countries in Europe and Asia as well. So they're skeptical about it, but they haven't come out and said, hey, you can't do this and this. Basically, every jurisdiction, or like not every, but most jurisdictions agree that as long as you're not doing something illegal, it's okay. But like they still don't know how to grapple with this issue. So I think especially in 2018, there's going to be a lot of countries that are going to come out with rules, especially like the SEC, I'm assuming is going to release a number of like statements. So I would say keep your eye out on the SEC's website, because in December 2017, they did something really similar.
So my last question is, how do you think, so I associate Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies with sort of the techno-libertarian anarchist community. How do you think that this group responds to this influx of regulation, or at least government interest and oversight?
So that's a really good question. I think, so with anything that started off as being decentralized, including like the internet, in a way. So we recently lost John Perry Barlow, who created EFF back in like the 1990s. And he had written this beautiful piece that I read in my 1L year of law school called A Declaration of Independence of Cyberspace. And basically he talked about how like the internet is free and that there's no government regulating it, and that everyone on the internet is going to like take care of it. Or maybe I'm saying this completely wrong, but that's what I remember from like back in the day. So I think with anything that starts off that's new and where people feel like they're the ones who are going to take care of it, I think they're obviously like in the beginning, it's going to be very hard for them to come to terms with the idea that it's going to be regulated by someone other than them. Because just the way in which Bitcoin works or blockchain works is the miners are the one who are taking care of like, or I guess are policing it in the way that it is currently being utilized. So I think there's going to be pushback, at least in the beginning, if not in the long-term future. But I think just because there's so much, I guess not so much, but there is fraud and manipulation that happens in this space, I think it isn't going to end up being regulated. That's just the reality of it. So,
and it is regulated to an extent already, right? I mean, you have to pay capital gains taxes on income that you earn through it. I mean, you can't commit fraud with it. It's still fraud.
Right.
It's still actionable.
Exactly.
So.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, thank you so much for joining us. Is there anything, I mean, we always give people the opportunity. Is there anything you'd like to plug? How can people reach out to you? If people have other questions about